couple things that have happened recently that some friends and I have been joking about is, what would happen if your last Facebook post was something maybe that you didn't feel really terrific about? Or maybe you had a bad day at work? It actually could happen, and it could happen really easily to any of us in this room right now. Any idea how many people die each year? 56 million. Now let's think about how many of them are on social media devices. We need the ability to be able to manage these devices after we die, or we need to have some closing or some finality to these kinds of intellectual property that we all hold, that we all post, and some days are better than others. Some days it's a beautiful picture of your children. The next day, I don't know, I've got bronchitis, and what's the latest antibiotic I should be getting from my doctor, right? And that's something you don't want to be the last post. What if we could do this? Well, we could. Think about it. This is not that hard. What if you picked a trustee for your social media devices? What if you picked somebody that could act as that trustee after you've passed and have them have the ability to pass along your postmortem plan and to execute on it after you're gone? There's a number of different executions in here. We could spend the entire 4 minutes talking about it, but some of the basics are just to the American population, some things that I've posted here, but there's a lot of cultural nuances also to death and to social media. And as you might have noticed a couple slides back, Q-Zone is number 2 in the world, and it probably will eclipse Facebook in the near future. Okay, so don't get me wrong, this is an idea. I don't have a website. I don't have a group of partners, and I don't have that much work invested in this, but I know this is a great idea. The target audience, everybody, is a potential target consumer of this product. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for financial investors, development partners, legal and public relations, because we all know great apps come from PR, not from technology. Some of the beginning ideas for operational structure are pretty basic, pretty self-explanatory. I've put together some startup costs, just trying to estimate what it would take to do a really solid piece of technology. There's a lot of security involved, and there's a lot of nuances, especially for international marketing, when you talk about the different types of solutions, tools, issues with different governments and access on international content. Revenue, there's a lot of potential revenue. In the first 2 years, I'm looking for 2 different portions of startup investment or potential partnerships. The expenses grow, the revenue grows, but the good news is by the end of it, there's a lot of money to be had for a lot of different people.
You had mentioned this, it's only an idea. It's a good idea. In fact, it's a great idea. In January, a company launched a Facebook app called If I Die. That's very similar to the idea. And there's a set of services called under a group heading called Digital Beyond, and they talk about all these different apps that tie to this. And I think the idea is good. I think that one thing that's going to be very important, and I don't have a question necessarily, but I think one thing that's important is to look at the services that are out, Asset Vault,
Yes.
and others, and and explain the differentiation. Because that's how I would ask. What would be the difference between Asset Vault or If I Die and your app?
Yeah.
Does this get tied into your personal trust and will and all that stuff as well on the traditional side of the world?
Sure. When I first thought about it, I thought it's just a simple device, right? It's a simple tool, but it does have arms and legs that should, I think, go into a personal trust, especially if you're somebody of significant wealth or intellectual property. Because you could have intellectual content that could later be published and utilized in different ways, but that's really up to the legacy of whoever manages that content for you. So yes, I do see it that way. I also think there's a number of ways for this to tie to not just social media content, but really all of the content of a life. So it could be financial, it could be intellectual from a professional standpoint, it could be personal intellectual property. So I think you could tie it to a number of different things. And I really, when I looked at it, I thought it's an app. But then when I really realized it, it's a much more, it could be a much more significant technical solution, some kind of an electrical form that could plug into a larger trust.
So how do you really plan to monetize it?
A couple of different ways that I originally had considered revenue and the different formats of which it could come in. So obviously the price of an app download. You could also have a separate web membership pricing structure, because it's not necessarily just the web app. You could have a deeper level of content or a deeper level of trust management on a web app that you wouldn't, or on a website that you wouldn't have on a mobile app. And then there's also the advertising, and I just did Google as an example on a cost per thousand. And then I really believe there's going to be significant revenue potential in cross-promotion and partnership.
You're going to get all, when you get a lot of passwords and things like that. I mean, how do you ensure that you're not going to, be compromised?
That was why I went with a little bit higher price tag on some of the development side of the business. You can obviously do an app and you can do a website a lot cheaper, but there's obviously a lot of security concerns with a site like this. So to the point about Vault, there's a number of different things that I'm going to need to figure out when it comes to the legal side of this, and then the IT infrastructure and security side. So one of the things I hope to do is partner with the best on this idea if I can.
So how do you plan to find out that people have really died?
There's a question about legitimacy with an app like this, correct? So currently right now, if you actually tried to work on behalf of somebody, if you're a trustee, somebody who's passed away and you want to close an account, there's a number of loopholes. There's a number of hoops you have to jump through to work with all the different social media companies, and they vary greatly. So some can be as significant as the formal presentation of a death certificate, notarized, stamped, along with a series of copies of everything from the trust to the executor of the trust documents. Others are much more simple. Some form of personal proof that you're a family member or close relation. What I'd like to do is work closely with the different social media entities to find out what is the best possible way to fulfill this app and what it's going to do for the end user, as well as what it's going to do with the social media outlet. So there's a couple of different ways you could do it. You could do it very top line and very simple, that it's just the sharing of passwords through a system where you have identified that trustee. You could have something more significant in that person, as we talked about, kind of with a more formal trust, becomes a part of a formal trust where they are an executor of an estate, and the documentation there is in some way expedited through the technology. So this is another question I have. There's all kinds of services out there that provide automation of documentation. So, I work at a business school. I deal with that all day long on applications. We could create the same kind of transmittal of information and relevancy on documentation, depending upon which outlet and what kind of information that they want to prove authenticity.
Okay, everybody's good?
Thanks.